Let him watch. Part 3. While spending the night with Arthur, Celia's attraction to him intensifies. In the following days, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd done with Dwight and Arthur. My memories were so vivid that they made me wet. Playing them over in my mind, I felt a hot pulse of lust between my thighs. At the bar, Dwight and I tried to be professional. We didn't go out back and fuck during our break, we didn't even sneak a kiss. But we did flash each other knowing smiles that our coworkers quickly noticed. I didn't see Arthur again until Thursday evening. Several times, I'd thought of reaching out to make sure everything was okay, but I always lost my nerve. Now, I couldn't help but beam as he strode into the bar. Your best customer just walked in, Mona told me, as if I didn't know. I found myself relieved that Dwight was off work that night. After what the three of us had shared, I feared it would feel strange to be caught between their attention like a netted butterfly. As I approached the corner booth where Arthur sat, he looked up at me, ready to return my smile, but his expression instead darkened with concern. "Celia, what's wrong?" he asked quietly. Glancing around at my other tables, I figured I could sit for a minute and chat with him. "Nothing's wrong," I promised. "I'm a little tired, that's all." "You look exhausted," Arthur said. When I started to protest, he quickly added, "Beautiful, but exhausted." I ducked my head, trying to hide how pleased I was at his compliment. I haven't gotten much sleep in the past few days. My roommate's boyfriend is visiting from out of town, and they stay out till 2 or 3 in the morning. I didn't tell Arthur that my apartment was tiny, and the walls might as well have been made of paper, as thin as they were. By the time I finally fall asleep, near dawn, I manage to get just a few hours rest before the two of them are back up again, slamming doors and laughing. Looking up at him, I saw that his brow had furrowed even more. "He's only visiting for a couple of weeks." I hurried to say. "I can tolerate anything for that long, but you don't have to tolerate it," Arthur said. "You can stay at my place instead." My eyes widened, but before I could respond, he rushed on. "You can sleep in the guest room that we used Monday night. You'll have plenty of privacy." I couldn't resist the urge to reach for his hand and give it a squeeze. "That's so kind of you," but I couldn't. "I don't get off till late most nights. I'd wake you up, and then you wouldn't get any sleep." Arthur looked down at our hands clasped together on the tabletop. "I've mentioned before that I don't sleep much," he said. "I haven't gotten a full night's rest since Melody died. So I'll be up when you arrive." Lifting his head, he met my gaze and managed to smile through the grief he clearly felt. "Make an old man happy, Celia. Accept my invitation." I rolled my eyes at his self-deprecating comment. "You're not old, Arthur. From what I've seen, you have the appetites of a young man." Now, he was the one grinning and ducking his head. I realized then how much I loved pleasing him. "If you're absolutely sure I won't be a bother to you, I'd love to stay at your place for a few nights. Just till I get caught up on some sleep." "You could never be a bother, sweetheart." When I stood and headed toward the bar to get his usual, Mona gave me a quizzical look. I knew she had to be curious as to why I was so affectionate with Arthur when Dwight and I clearly had something going on. It was only long after Arthur had left, and Mona and I were closing up the bar, that she asked, "How are things with Dwight?" "Good," I replied, trying to sound casual. "I mean, neither of us are looking for a serious relationship, but we're having fun." "Oh, I bet." Mona laughed. "If I were younger, I'd love to have some fun with him. A lot of guys his age are into older women," I told her with a wink. She squawked and snapped a dish towel at me, but I continued to mercilessly tease her. "Don't you dare repeat what I said to him," she ordered through her giggles. I did my best to look angelic while replying, "Your secret is safe with me." When I was finally in my car, I sent Arthur a text letting him know I was on my way. He replied almost immediately, "Drive safe. See you soon." Even as I realized I was being ridiculous, I fought to suppress my nervous excitement during the drive to Arthur's house. I could try to convince myself that this meant nothing, and that he was simply being kind by offering me a quiet place to sleep, but I knew better. I didn't have to ring the bell before Arthur let me in. He'd clearly been waiting for me. Come on in, Celia. Instead of looking as tired as I felt, he seemed delighted to have me as a guest, even at this time of night. Are you hungry? It'll take me just a few minutes to make a sandwich, I gave him a grateful smile. I really appreciate the offer, Arthur. But I think I'm ready for bed. While he led me toward the guest room, I had to remind myself that this man had come all over my tits just days before. Right now, his behavior toward me was strictly platonic. He pointed out his own bedroom before we arrived at the large bathroom across the hall from the room where I'd be sleeping. I've set out a toothbrush for you, and there are plenty of towels in the linen closet, he told me. I also left a t-shirt of mine on the bed for you to sleep in, thank you so much. Before I could stop myself, I moved to embrace him. You're absolutely wonderful, Arthur laughed softly as he slipped his arms around me. Let me know if you need anything. Okay, he planted a kiss on the top of my head, then wished me good night. Once he'd left the room, I brushed my teeth and washed the makeup from my face. With a comb from my purse, I tamed my hair of stray tangles. Gazing at my reflection, I thought I looked younger. My eyes were slightly widened in surprise at finding myself in this house again, in the bedroom. After pulling Arthur's shirt over my head, I held the fabric to my face and inhaled deeply, hoping to catch his scent. I was disappointed to smell only expensive detergent. I tried to sleep in that luxurious bed, but my thoughts kept returning to Arthur, and how he'd looked while stroking. I remembered the fierce expression on his face when he orgasmed. And the way he'd so tenderly wiped. In the darkness of the room, I slipped my hand beneath the t-shirt and fondled. It felt deliciously wicked, making myself wet, and my moans soon intruded on the silence. My exhaustion seemed to vanish in the face of arousal. I thought of Arthur in the master bedroom. Was he still awake? Was he lying there and imagining me while touching himself? Fantasizing about him doing just that started a needy ache between my thighs. Tugging and pinching my excited me, but I longed for more. I longed for him. Throwing back the covers, I climbed from the bed. My racing pulse seemed to drive me through the shadows. Not once did I hesitate on my way to Arthur's room. I grinned when I saw the sliver of light beneath his closed door. I gently knocked, holding my breath as I waited. I heard movement in the room, and the sound of his approaching footsteps. He opened the door, wearing nothing but a pair of boxers. His expression kind and expectant. He obviously thought I'd come to ask for some household item he'd forgotten to provide. Everything all right, Celia? I allowed my gaze to sweep over him. He was thin, as I knew he would be, but there was a firmness to his body that I hadn't expected. Though the fine suits he wore made him look distinguished, they concealed a lot, too. Suddenly nervous, I crossed my arms. I'm sorry, Arthur. I shouldn't have bothered you. But I struggled to say what I really wanted. My face burned hot from the fear that I'd be turned away. Yet I managed to ask, would you mind if I slept in here with you? Just for tonight. I heard his sharp intake of breath. The surprise was evident on his face. Almost immediately, I started backtracking. I'm sorry, I said again. Please forget I asked. You've been so kind, and I'm acting like an idiot. No, you're not, he said firmly. And of course you can sleep in here. Still, I hesitated. Are you sure? I totally understand if you want your privacy. In response, Arthur reached for my hand and drew me to him. I thought he might kiss me then. I would have happily let him. But he merely led me to his bed, where he'd been reading a book by lamplight. Neither of us spoke as we slid beneath the covers. I took several deep breaths to calm my nervousness. While I rested on my side, Arthur lay on his back, his head turned toward me. Are you comfortable? He asked. Very, I murmured. And I promise I won't crowd you. Once I fall asleep, I tend to stay in the same spot. Arthur's gaze took on that heat I'd come to know well. Crowd me all you want. His voice was undeniably seductive. Are you sure? I asked again even while moving closer. Very. I curled up against him, my hand resting on his chest. He was quick to slip an arm beneath me in a half-embrace. "Do you know why I came to your room?" I whispered. Arthur's mouth was just inches from mine as he said, "Tell me." I grinned, taking my bottom lip between my teeth. Then I replied, "I was thinking of you coming all over my tits, and how good it felt when you wiped me clean." So I started playing with he made no attempt to suppress his moan. I was completely docile while he eased me onto my back. Propping himself up on his arm, he started to slowly lift the shirt I wore. We were both breathing faster, unwilling to fight our growing lust. Once my breasts were revealed to him, he grazed with his fingertips. "Did you touch them like this?" Now, it was my turn to moan. At first. But then I got a little rough with them. "They're so sensitive." "I'll be gentle, sweetheart." Despite the arousal overtaking him, he used a light touch. His palm slid over each hard peak in turn, delivering caresses that made me ache for more. Soon, I was writhing beneath his tender attention. Arthur lowered his head, circling his tongue around my right. I let out a cry that betrayed my sheer horniness, and he rewarded me by suckling. With my fingers buried in his hair, I held him to me. He'd obviously missed this kind of intimacy, and I was thrilled to be the woman giving him what he so craved. When Arthur finally let me escape his lips, I positioned myself so that I could easily stroke through his boxers. He was fully hard and ready for me. Our eyes locked, and he made a guttural sound as my fingers explored the outline of his erection. It didn't take long for his own need to get the best of him. I delighted in feeling his hot skin against my palm. My stroking was gentle and unrushed. I wanted to take my time in pleasing him. "Oh, Celia, that's nice." Arthur breathed. He wore that smile that made him look so much younger. My tits rose and fell with my rapid breaths. "I won't be able to stop till I come," I confessed to him. Arthur lifted his eyebrows, his smile growing sly. "Is that right?" He slipped a hand into, releasing another when he discovered how wet I was. "You're in quite a state. Aren't you, baby?" I nodded, my eyes wide and helpless. "Please," I begged. He sought out mine with skillful fingers, intuiting just the right amount of pressure to use against that swollen bud. I pressed my face to his chest as my hips began a rhythmic rocking. "I know just how to take care of you," Arthur whispered. I would have let him do anything at that moment. But instead of fucking me senseless, he leaned to open his bedside table drawer. I had to fight back a whimper at the sudden absence of his touch. Still, I resolved to be patient, for I guessed he was getting. His smile was actually a little sheepish as he retrieved a wand vibrator and held it up for me to see. "I bought this yesterday," he revealed, in the hopes that I could persuade Dwight to use it on you while I watched. I began throbbing at the sight of the vibrator. Imagining how it would feel between my thighs sent a shudder through me. "It's fully charged and ready to go," Arthur went on. "The very helpful lady at the shop where I bought it told me that it's her favorite, but it can be a little intense." "I like intense," I immediately replied. Arthur laughed at my eagerness, but before he had a chance to say anything else, I sat up on the bed. It took me only seconds to strip out of my shirt and panties. His gaze moved over me, lingering. "Ah, the sight of you. You have no idea what it does to me." "Celia," my stare moved from his face to his erection. With a devilish smile, I said, "Oh, I think I have an idea." Lying back down, I spread my outer lips apart. "Now look what you do to me." Of course, Arthur had seen me before, yet this intimate display still transfixed him. Once he was lying at my side, with his heart prodding my skin, he seemed to lose all inhibition. "You want me to play with that sweet pussy, don't you?" It wasn't a question, but I knew he got off on hearing me say it. "Yes. I want you to make me come." Arthur turned on the vibrator, and its loud hum made my eyes widen. I'd used toys in the past, but nothing so powerful. At first, he merely pressed the wand's head against my outer lips. Even through that layer of flesh, I could feel the vibrator's intensity. Oh, my God. More. I realized how slutty I sounded, and I knew Arthur loved it. His grin was downright wicked as he nestled the head against my inner folds. Still, he avoided stimulating. I reached to stroke his, as if that would coax him into giving me what I wanted. A sound like a growl emerged from his throat just before he homed in on I released a wail at the exquisite sensation. My hand pumped faster, and he began moving the wand in a slightly circular motion. "Oh, fuck, that feels so good." Keeping the vibrator firmly against me, Arthur leaned to it was almost too much, the bliss of both his mouth and the toy. My cries grew louder, reverberating throughout the room. I lay on that bed, dripping wet and carrying on like a wild creature, while Arthur's pulsed in my grasp. Already, I was so close, my body tense with anticipation. When my thighs started shaking violently, Arthur lifted his head. "Come for me, sweetheart. Just let go." I had no choice but to do as he said. The first contractions were so fierce that they bordered on painful, and I couldn't hold back a short scream. The vibrator continued humming away, relentless on until I succumbed to another wave of spasms. Gazing up at Arthur, I knew he derived an intense satisfaction from making me orgasm so hard. He fixed his stare on my face, eager to witness my undoing. Only when I began whimpering did he turn off the vibrator. Yet he was far from finished. Planting kisses on my neck and breasts, he kept the toy between my thighs. "That was fucking amazing," I said, still panting. He grinned at my wide-eyed, rapturous expression. "You're amazing, Celia." Pressing my hand against the back of his head, I drew him to me. His kiss was different than Dwight's, less demanding yet just as hungry. At first, his tongue merely grazed mine, which only served to increase my desire. Before long, I was the demanding one, kissing him harder. My fervor clearly excited him, for his lips and tongue grew far more insistent. Already, I ached for him to lower his body onto mine. When he turned on the vibrator again, I moaned into his mouth. My clit was still swollen, and almost instantly, I was right back at the peak of arousal. Finally, I had to break the kiss in order to catch my breath. Even as I cried out from the intensity, I worked my pussy against the wand's head. Arthur's stare grew hotter at the sight of my wanton movements. I was completely overwhelmed by lust, focused only on having another orgasm. "I love making you lose control like this," he murmured. And then he increased the speed of the vibrator. I managed a single shriek before my second climax seized me. The spasms were so strong that they muted my cries, and I could only make a noise from low in my throat. All the while, Arthur was merciless, working me into an absolute frenzy. My eyes rolled as I violently shuddered, and I both feared and hoped the blissful contractions would never subside. Arthur realized the exact moment when the stimulation became too much. Turning off the vibrator, he gave me a chance to recover. I was coated in sweat, laughing from the rush of such an intense orgasm. His lips were tender on my forehead and cheeks. It was as if he wanted to soothe me with those sweet kisses. He still held the vibrator, and when I again heard its now familiar hum, I actually cupped a hand over my. "I don't think I can," for the first time since I'd met him. Arthur appeared determined to have his way. "I'm not finished playing with you," he said in a firm voice. Witnessing this new side to him made me utterly submissive. I wanted him to control me, to use my body as he wished. With gentle fingers, he parted my outer lips. "You're so flushed and swollen. And your look so sensitive." He stared at my sex for a long moment before meeting my eyes. "You'll be able to come for me again." I didn't try to argue. Instead, I lay before him, whimpering from both exhaustion and a rekindled arousal. He didn't press the wand's head directly against my this time. I felt him position it slightly to the right, at an angle, which made the vibration less intense. Now, the toy grazed, delivering a subtle but continual stimulation. I could hear how wet I was, and despite my fatigue, I began moving my hips once more. Arthur grinned from his own satisfaction. When I hovered right at the precipice, unable to surrender, he understood my desperate whine. All it took was him placing the toy firmly against to make me arch my back and release a wail. "That's it, Celia," he coaxed in a voice thick with lust. I let him see me at my most vulnerable, in the moment that I gave up all control and succumbed to my climax. He stroked my skin while making encouraging sounds, and my body continued wringing every ounce of bliss from my muscles. Only when I started to pull away did he finally turn off the vibrator and set it aside. Once Arthur lay back down at my side, he took me in his arms and held me until I stopped shaking. For several minutes, I didn't trust myself to speak. In this state, it would be easy to say too much. I could feel that he was still fully hard, but he seemed to give little thought to his own release. I was certainly thinking about it, though. Looking up at him, I couldn't hide my grin as I asked, "Can I use the vibrator on you?" Arthur let out a surprised laugh, seeming at a loss as to how to respond. I started to worry that I'd made him uncomfortable, so of course, I reverted to my old habit of over-explaining. "It's something that I've seen in porn, and I thought it looked hot. But we don't have to. He lowered his lips to mine, then whispered, "I'm all yours." Moments later, he was lying on his back, while I knelt at his side. Looming out from him, seemed to beg for my attention. I gave it a few teasing strokes, but that was enough to get him breathing faster, still grasping as I turned on the vibrator. At first, I used only the lightest pressure while moving the wand's head along the underside of his shaft. I took my time stimulating most of his length, being careful to avoid the tip. Arthur let out a pleasured groan. Smiling down at him, I said, "Feels good, huh?" "It feels incredible." As if to emphasize his words. I fought the desire to lap it up. Instead, I dared to graze his frenulum with the vibrator, the way he'd grazed. The sensation sent a fierce jolt through him. Is that too much? I immediately turned off the toy. The last thing I wanted to do was make him uncomfortable. "No," he assured me, his stare fixed on the vibrator. "It's just really intense. I won't last long." I flashed a triumphant grin at Arthur's words. My muscles were still relaxed after the multiple orgasms he'd given me, and I wanted to make him come so hard that he felt the same deep relaxation afterward. I cupped my palm around his tip, nestling it between my hand and the wand. The moment I turned the vibrator back on, he gasped. I watched as his features grew taut from the force of his arousal. When he spoke, his voice was strained. "Ah, fuck yes. Don't stop." I was glad he let me know how much he enjoyed this. Gently, so gently, I massaged his sensitive underside, maintaining a consistent pressure. It took less than a minute for him to begin trembling. As he looked up at me, his eyes were full of pleading, and his groans morphed into cries. I noticed his balls drawing up. "Give me your," I urged. "You know how much I love it." Arthur needed no further coaxing. Shuddering fiercely, he came with a roar. The sound lingered in my straight up into the air. It rained down upon both of us, drawing a peal of delighted laughter from my lips. More cum followed in rapid bursts. And Arthur could only moan helplessly while I worked to drain him of every drop. Now flushed crimson, was my sole focus. I'd never seen a man produce so much. When I finally turned off the toy and set it on the bed, Arthur grinned. He was breathing hard as he said, "I made quite a mess. I love getting dirty with you," I told him. Once we'd cleaned up and returned to bed, I nestled against him in the darkness. I felt his lips on my hair, and his hands were warm against my skin. "I'm so glad you agreed to spend the night," he whispered. "Me, too," I whispered back. He soon fell into a slumber. It took me a little longer, for I was riding a wave of euphoria. Even after I managed to drift off, I woke several times, sensing I was in a new place. Beside me, Arthur remained still. I felt a surge of happiness while listening to his deep, even breathing. For countless nights, he'd been unable to rest, overwhelmed by profound grief. But now that I was in his bed, he slept soundly.